I just went into I have my After Effects project right here on my desktop. And when I double click into it, I have a few folders right here. It's really important to kind of keep things organized in here. And so I have things like my images where, for instance, I was using my puppet character reference drawing. And then for footage, this is where I'm going to put any video footage that I plan on using. And so the video footage I took right here is just a real simple camera shot here of a piano. And this is a good example of footage that will be pretty easy to motion track right here. So we have some camera movement, but it's not going too crazy right here. And one thing to keep in mind is the way that After Effects tracks camera movement is it uses, it's reading the contrast in your images right here. And so notice that this footage right here, I'm using a keyboard. So we have the black and white key. So there's just really nice contrast in here. So it's really able to kind of pick out what's what, looking at this footage here. And also notice that I'm not moving the camera like crazy. And so I am moving it so that there's something significant for it to track, but I'm not going crazy with it. Because if, for instance, the camera is moving really rapidly, what happens when there's a rapid camera movement is there's something called motion blur, where things become blurry on screen. And those moments of blurriness, the After Effects or any computer will kind of see those blurred pixels and they won't know what to track at that point. So that's kind of two components to keep in mind when doing motion tracking right here. And some good news is there's kind of 4 different ways to motion track, and it kind of depends on what you're doing here. And for this assignment, what we're doing is we're tracking the camera movement is what we're doing. And this is the easiest kind of motion tracking that there is. It's a pretty straightforward process here. But before I can get fully into motion tracking here, I need to introduce you to 3D layers in After Effects, because we're going to start using 3D space in After Effects now to do this motion tracking. Because since it's tracking the camera in 3D space, we're having to work in 3D space now. And so just to kind of give a preview here, I have this little character here, and we have the footage, and we can see that it's kind of tracking on top of the keyboard right there when we start to render this out here. And so to start things off, I'm just going to start with a blank composition. So I'm just going to go into the comps and go to new composition. And this is just so I can show you what 3D layers are and how to operate them right here. So I'm going to just call this class demo 1. And so this is going to be a 2-part demonstration. So the first part is what I'm going to do now, where I introduce you all to what 3D layers are and how they work in After Effects, how you can kind of navigate the perspective views. And then the second part, I'll show how we can add motion tracking into that. So for the first part, I'm just making this blank composition. I'm just calling it class demo right here. I'm working in HD TV, which is 1920 by 1080. Square pixels, you always want square pixels. And frame rate, I'm working at 24. Although for this footage that I took, it's at 2997. So I'll need to kind of switch over to that here. And when I get to that stage, and it's 6 seconds long. And so that's all okay right there. And I'm just going to press this button right here, which just shows the alpha channel going behind it right there. And so remember that button hides things. If you have a blank color back here, you can go to composition settings, and you can click here and change your background color if you want. But again, this button right here hides it. So looking at this view right here, I'm just going to make this a little bit larger. Where do I start with this? So first off, I need to make a 3D layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to layer, new, and we have these different kind of objects and layers that we can create in After Effects. And some of the things that we can make 3D is we can make a shape layer 3D. We can make a solid layer 3D. So those are 2 of the things that we've been using in the past for our projects. A camera is really important in 3D space because we need to kind of capture the 3D. So a camera is an important component of 3D. And most of these things we can have become 3D objects right here. Text, solids, lights, cameras, nulls, shape layers, and really just adjustment layers, the only thing where I never make it 3D right here. And so to start things off, I'm just going to start with a new solid right here. And remember, a solid is just like a shape layer. Actually, you know what? I'll just do a shape layer. Let's stick with what we've been doing here. So I'm going to go layer new and create a shape layer right here. And so remember, a shape layer is blank when you first create it right here. So we need to just create something in there so that it fills in. So right now, if I were to use either the pen tool or this rectangular mask tool right here, I would have a fill that's kind of this greenish bluish kind of color right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the rectangle tool and draw something on right here. So I'm just drawing on a rectangle right here, and I'll press V to just go to normal selection here. And you can see that the anchor point is a little off right here. And I like to just go ahead and center the anchor point whenever I create a new shape layer. So I'm going to click Y. So I'm just going to tap Y on my keyboard or press this button right here, which is the tool to move, pan the anchor point behind the object right here. And if you hold Command on your keyboard, you can just snap it to the middle of your object. Remember, if you hold down Command, if you don't hold down Command, it's a free transform when you're moving this anchor point. And then if you hold down Command, you can either snap it to the edges or snap it to the center of your object right there. And so that's all I'm going to do right now is I just created a rectangular shape and took the anchor point and just put it in the middle right there. And converting this into a 3D object is really simple. So the only thing you need to do to convert this shape layer into a 3D object is if you look over here in the timeline, we have this button right here, which enables motion blur. We're going to worry about this button later. And we have this button right here, which is like a little 3D cube right here. And if you press the little 3D cube button, it turns this into this shape layer into a 3D object where we can now rotate it. Normally you could only rotate it in one direction. So I'm going to undo that just to show you how we normally rotate this object. So it's back in 2D. And if I rotate it now, I can only rotate it this way right now. And if I make it 3D by pressing this button, and that's all I have to do to turn it 3D, is if you look under the transform tools, I now have the option. The initial option was to rotate in, which one was it? Rotate in Z. So that's the default right there. But I can now rotate it in the Y rotation right there. And I can rotate it in the X rotation right there. And I can also, so right now I'm just doing these rotations by clicking this arrow under transform right here and then going down to the 3 rotation options. You can also select your shape layer and press R, and then all the rotation options show up right here. It's a shortcut that just makes it only the rotation controls right there. And so we can rotate X, Y, and Z right here in 3D space. You can also rotate by grabbing these handles right here. So you can see right here, I'm grabbing the blue handle and I'm rotating in Z. And as I hold it, it's showing the amount of degrees that I'm rotating in. And let's see here, if I hold shift, it'll snap to 15-degree increments here. And I'll press edit undo. But I can also rotate in the Y rotation just by grabbing this green handle right here. And then I can rotate in the, what is this, X rotation by grabbing the red handle right here. So there's kind of 2 ways you can rotate the handles. So you can grab them down here. So I'm just clicking on the numbers and rotating this way, dragging left to right. Or I can click these little circles on the handles and start to rotate it that way. I can also, it's not just rotation, but I can also move this. So typically with a normal layer, I can move it in, let's see here, X space. I can move it in Y space, but a new one with 3D spaces, I can move it in Z space. And so it's hard to see right here, but I can either click right in the center here on this blue circle to move it in Z space. So I'm dragging it forward by dragging right. Then I can move it, oops, I can move it backwards, oops, I just disengaged the 3D by mistake. I can drag it backwards by dragging left right there. And so it's moving away from us in 3D space right there. I can also, so the handle's a little hard to grab right there because it's facing directly at us. But if I go to position and I go to Z right here, so this is X right here, which is left and right, Y, which is up and down, that's the second number right here. And then Z is the last number, so that brings us either forward or backward in space right there. And so that's how you adjust this, the rotation and the spatial placement of any object in After Effects. And remember, I can keyframe this. So for instance, if I wanted to animate this, let's say I wanted to animate this coming forward, I could just drag this backwards using the Z parameter under position right here, create a keyframe, drag forward to 2 seconds in, and then just bring it forward right here, and it automatically generates the second keyframe. Oops. Can also type in a number right here. And so now it's animating. Let me just fit this back onto the screen. So now it's animating forward. So it's actually coming forward in space right here. And you can also animate any of these parameters with rotation right here. So just to kind of demonstrate it, I'll hold shift and snap to my first keyframe right here. So I'm holding shift and snapping to this keyframe. And then I'll do this rotation. So I'll do Y rotation is initially at -60. And I just clicked this button the stopwatch to generate a keyframe. Then I'm going to hold shift, snap it to the second keyframe, and then type in 0. And so now it's rotating and then coming into position right there. And remember, these are just standard keyframes I'm making, so they're not easing in. If I want them to ease in, all I need to do is select the keyframes that I want to ease in right here. Click on the graph editor right here. And with these 2 keyframes selected, I'll just press the ease in button, which is this button right here. And you'll see that the graph editor changes. Remember, with the graph editor, we have 2 viewing modes. So we have this viewing mode right here. And if you click on this button right here, we can go to, so that's the speed graph, and we can go to the value graph right here. So it just kind of depends on which one you prefer here. And I can change the velocity of it easing in by just dragging and selecting both of those keyframes right there. And then I'm just grabbing the Bezier handle and dragging it to the left, and it'll now look like this. And so now it's going to start quick and then ease in right there. So it starts by looking like this. So this is just your standard velocity right here, where it's a consistent velocity in rotation and position. And then I went into the graph editor, and then I clicked on this button right here to create an ease in. I dragged and selected the keyframe right here. So I selected both the rotation and the position right here. So I can't remember which one's which. I think this is the position, that's the rotation right there. And so I drag them both, and then I just holding shift, I'm grabbing the Bezier handle just to make sure that I bring the Bezier handle directly to the left rather than having it at some weird angle like this. If I don't hold shift, it can get some weird parameters in there. So I hold shift and just drag it to the left just to create a nice velocity keyframe. So I just dragged it all the way to the left, and you can see it starts fast, and then it eases into the keyframe, and it generates a pretty nice little ease in animation right there. So 3D is not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily need to be too complicated right here. It's just essentially to initiate it, you press this button. That'll make any layer 3D pretty much, other than like audio layers, essentially. And yeah, you generate keyframes the same way, just under rotation, we get 3 different forms of rotation rather than just one option. And then position, normally when you're changing the position, you get X and Y. And then in 3D space, we just have the added Z, where we can bring objects forwards and backwards physically right here. And so to build on top of this, we have a shape layer animating on. And what I want to show now is you can create cameras in After Effects. So I'm going to go to Layer, New, and then Camera right here. So Layer, New, and Camera. And when you click Layer, New, and Camera, you get this option right here. And so when we motion track, what After Effects is doing is it's reading the footage, and it automatically generates one of these based off of what it's seeing right there. And it's pretty good at it. And in this camera, we can change different things. Like, for instance, if you look at focal length, we can change the focal length of the camera. So the default is the same as it is in Maya, which is 35 millimeters. And if I drag this to a small number, it'll be a wide angle lens. And if I drag it to a large number, it'll be more of a telephoto lens, meaning its space gets shrunk as the number gets higher, and space gets more exaggerated as the number gets lower. And so there's some different things we can do to this. We can enable depth of field, which is something we're not going to go over yet today, but there's some interesting things you can do with the camera. But all you need to do is just go to Layer, New, select Camera, and then this menu will come up, and you don't really need to change anything here. You can just press OK, and it'll create a camera. And so when you create a camera, nothing really changes. I guess the perspective changes just slightly right there. But nothing major changes with my animation right here. But what it did is it created a camera in 3D space. And so this is where this is a really important thing right here is in these tabs over here, we have several tabs where we can change the active perspective right here. So right now it's looking through the camera 1, which is what we just created right here. You can see that's camera 1. But we also have what's called orthographic views, which for anyone who's used 3D software should be familiar. So right now it's on 1 view. If I click on this, I can now switch to 2 views or 4 views. So let me show 2 views first. So it's this right tab. So the default's 1 view. That's what you're going to want most of the time. But sometimes when you're wanting to animate things in 3D, you need to go to 2 views right here. And I'm just going to zoom out right here. And so this is our main perspective view. And then the second view that usually gets created right here is a top view. And I can see which view is selected by these little blue arrows that are on the outside right here. So right now I have my top view selected, and right now I have my active camera selected. And you can see as I click back and forth, so top view, active camera, and if you look at this tab right here, that's the active camera we're looking through. And if I click here, that's the top view we're looking through. And so one thing that's really helpful about the top view is as this animates, I can see just from the top perspective that this triangle here, this pink triangle, is my camera. And so the camera is positioned right here at the base of the triangle, or at the tip of the triangle. And then the triangle right here, these arrows right here indicate its field of view right here. So that's indicating its field of view from the top. And then we have the shape layer that I just animated right here. And if I select the shape layer, I can see its motion path. And as I animate it, I can see where it's moving around right here. And so something that's fun that we can do here in 3D space is I can now animate the camera. So with the camera, the way I like to animate a camera is I like to attach a null to it. But for now, I'm going to not do that. And we'll get into that at another time here. Is you can animate the camera. And so one reason I animate a null to it is a lot of times you can just keep adding nulls to it and it makes the animation a little easier to organize. But essentially, you can animate just by keyframing the camera directly. And so right here, we have my camera positioned right here, which is the default position. And I can change the orientation, the X, Y, and Z axes, right, XI right here. And so to start things off, I'm just going to create a keyframe right here at 1.5 seconds in at its default position. Then I'm going to go back to the initial keyframe, and then I'm going to grab the camera and move it backwards in Z space. And you can see that I can now animate the camera moving forward into space right here. Oops. Let's see here. Oh, something went wrong there. Let me try that one more time. Okay, so I have the camera right here at 1.5 seconds. And then I'm going to click this button to keyframe the position. And I'm going to just drag this last number right here under position to zoom it, to dolly it back a little bit. And so now you can see right here in the top view, and I can change the perspective of my top view a little bit by if I hold down spacebar, I get the hand tool. Or if you hold H for the hand tool right here, I can pan it around. And if you want to zoom in, you can just use the middle mouse wheel and reposition this a little bit. And you can see I have the camera selected, and since I have the camera selected, I have the motion path that shows up pink right here and the 2 keyframes. And so I can animate the camera just the way I would any other objects in After Effects. So right now, the shape layer is animating towards us and rotating in, but also the camera, you can kind of see it. If I select them both right here, the camera is also moving in towards it right there. And so I can rotate the camera, I can create all different kinds of animation within it. And one last thing I want to show with the camera right here is I can change the point of interest. And so the point of interest, I think you can get by without ever messing with the point of interest right here. But one thing you can do with the point of interest is this little thing right here. And this is just the area where the camera is aiming beyond its just simple rotation and things like that. And so you can have, essentially what it does is it allows you to animate the camera's position, but it gives you a second level that you can animate right there. So the point of interest is right here. And in this class, you don't ever really need to mess with it. It's usually best just to kind of leave it alone. But what it does is it's this little handle that's right here. And you can kind of change where your camera's aiming beyond it. But you can also do that exact same thing just by changing its rotation right here. So I generally find it a little easier to stay organized, just animating the position and then the rotations under the camera right here to change its position right here. And that's an introduction to 3D space right there. One last thing I'll say right here is this tab right here is how you switch between one view right here. And then I switched it to do two views where I have the active camera right here. And then I have the top view right here. But you can go down and click 4 views right here. And so what you're seeing with 4 views is I have, now it's switched around. I have right here, I have the active camera. Right here, I have the top view, which is what we were just looking at. And I'm just using my middle mouse wheel to zoom out and the space bar to pan it. Right here, I have the front view. And then finally right here, and I'm just clicking it. So these blue arrows show on the outside so I can see where I'm clicking. This is the side view right here. So depending if you want to see the side view or the top view, you can either go into this 4 view mode right here, or if these windows are too small for you, you can go to 2 views, and then you can click on the top view right here, and then you can change whether it's the top view, the front, back, or side right here, just by changing this tab, this right here. So let's see here. I'm going to switch it back to one view, press this tab, and then bring it back to fit to screen. And that kind of brings us back to where we were. And so essentially with 3D layers in After Effects, the main thing to remember is we can now introduce a camera into the scene. When you have 2D layers, the camera doesn't do anything with them. It doesn't really read it. I mean, you can have 2D layers in a project with a 3D camera, but when you zoom the camera in and out, so I'll just turn the shape layer out of 3D. When I'm rotating, you can see, so I turned off 3D in the shape layer. So this shape layer is no longer either rotating or moving in 3D space. But this camera, if I switch it to top view right here, so I'm going to go to 2 views, and you can see that the camera is dollying in right here. But since the shape layer is now a 2D layer right here, so 3D is disengaged, that camera move doesn't do anything to it because the camera move only affects 3D objects right here. Does anyone have any questions about this kind of overview of making layers 3D and an introduction to 3D space here? Okay, so the reason that we went over that is because, again, when we motion track, what's going to happen is After Effects is going to read the footage and it's going to create a camera, and we're going to have to start working in 3D space right here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to import my footage, and I've already done it, it looks like right here. But to import footage, you just select your footage folder in After Effects if you've made one, and then you go to File, Import, to File, and then find your footage and import it in, which I've already done right here. And what I'm going to do is, so this is my footage file right here. And this is just something I took with my iPhone. It's 1920 by 1080 at 29.97. So I'm going to right click on it and do new composition from selected right here. And then I'm just going to type return on it. And I'm just going to call this motion track right here and double click it. And so by double clicking it right here, and I'll just drag this into my comps, is I now have, just by doing that, I have created a composition out of the footage that I created right here. And so you can see right here, the footage I took was about 10 seconds long. If I want this to be shorter, I'm going to make this a little shorter. So I'm going to drag it down to 6 seconds right here. Just click and drag this and hold shift so it snaps right there. And then I can go up to composition and then composition settings. And instead of this being 10 seconds and 18 frames, I'm just going to type in 06 and then 00 right there. So this is now a 1920 by 1080 composition, it automatically read the frame rate of the footage that it took since I right-clicked and made a new composition out of it. So it automatically read the frame rate, which is 29.97 for this one. And I changed the duration from 10 seconds to 6 seconds. And one reason I did that is it just having a little less footage to process just makes the motion tracking go a little bit quicker, which is particularly relevant since we're doing a demonstration here. So I have the footage right here, and let's see here. Let me just close some of these tabs just by clicking on them. This is a little unwieldy here. Okay, so on the right side of your screen, you should be able to find a tracker panel right here. And if you don't see one, you can go up to Window and then go down to Tracker right here. And that'll bring up your tracker panel right there. And what this panel does is it's 4 different kinds of motion tracking that are built directly into After Effects. And there's kind of more motion tracking that we can do with some free plugins and things like that, but these are the ones that are kind of automatically built in. And so we have Warp Stabilizer and Stabilize Motion on the right here. And these are 2 that if you have really shaky footage and you want it to be less shaky, this is kind of motion tracking that enables you to do that. We have Track Motion, which enables you, let's just say, for instance, you had a phone on screen and you wanted to motion track the screen of the phone and put a different screen on the phone or something like that. That's what this one is right here, the bottom left, so Track Motion. And so that's one that's not really important for this assignment that we might go over at some point this semester, we'll see. But the main one, what we want is we want to track the camera because we want to see how the camera is moving in 3D space, read it, and then put our characters into that 3D space right here. So you want to make sure you just go up to Window and go down to Tracker if you don't see this tracker panel right here. And then with the footage selected right here, I'm just going to click on Track Camera right here. And essentially this does a lot of things for us here. So you can see that it's analyzing the background right now. And while it's doing that, I just kind of want to walk you through some of these parameters that you might want to change when it's processing your motion tracking right here. So it's analyzing right now, and I can cancel the analysis just by pressing this button right here if I want to change some of these settings right here. So a lot of the time, you're not going to really need to change too much of this. I noticed that I clicked this Advanced tab just to open it up. I think something you're going to want to do every single time that you motion track, though, is you're going to want to click on under Advanced. You want to just turn on Detailed Analysis right here. It's only going to make it take a few extra seconds to motion track, and you're going to get way better results when you do it. So just go to Advanced and then turn on Detailed Analysis right here. So it just makes the analysis take another couple of seconds, but it's well worth it right here. And then up here, so we can either press cancel or analyze right here just to get it to process the footage. The shot type right here, most of the time you're going to just keep it as default, which is fixed angle of view. And what that is just if you're just moving your camera around normally, it's going to be this. The other option that you have right here is you have variable zoom. And so that's if you're like pinching the screen and zooming in and out of your camera right here, you know, something like that. So variable zoom. So if you have a variable zoom, it's going to be harder to motion track, and you're definitely going to want to turn on this button right here, or else it'll just kind of go haywire on you. But most of the time, this top option is going to work because most of the time you're not zooming here. And most of these other options right here are things you don't need to mess with right here. You can see that it tracked the footage in the background after I kind of changed some things right here. And we only have 2 more tabs that you might want to mess with right here. And so this is the track point size. So you can see these little X's that generated right here on my screen. So my After Effects read the footage, and you can see it generated these little color X marks right here. And hopefully if this works, generally speaking, some of them will turn on and off right here. But if you look at it, hopefully the X's don't float around too much, you know, and they look like they're locked in onto a part of your footage right there. And these 2 sliders right here, I can make the X's bigger right here if I'm having trouble seeing them. So that's the, what is that? That's the track point size right here. So I can either make them smaller or bigger by dragging that. And then the target size is, so the way that you create your tracking point is you hover your cursor on top of it. It creates this red target disk right here. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to place the target disk in a way that it looks like it's laying flat on one of your surfaces right here. And this target size, so right now my target disk is this size right here on my screen, and then it's at 100. And if I drag it up right here, so just clicking and dragging to the right, you can see that the disk becomes larger. And so that could be helpful if if it helps you see how it's reading the space a little bit better right here. So all you're really having to mess with here is most of the time you don't need to mess with this. These two parameters right here are just, and it don't change the motion tracking at all. It just changes your visual readout right now between this disk and the X's that are generated right here. And the main thing you want to change is you want to do detailed analysis. You're always going to want to turn that on, and that's under the advanced tab right here. And then we also have these options right here. And generally what I say is try not to do these options at first, but if your track doesn't come out well, you can try one of these to see, like, for instance, if you're on a tripod or something like that, it kind of gives you some descriptive parameters just to help guide After Effects if it's having trouble figuring out your movement. But auto detect is usually good, but just keep in mind that these are some other options in case this doesn't track well right here. And so that is the tracking process. Just to remember, to kind of recap what we've done so far is I brought in my footage and made a composition out of it and made sure the frame rate was right. I trimmed it down because it was a little too long. And then I went under window and then found tracker right here. And I brought up this window right here. You have 4 options, and we're going for the upper left one where we track the camera. So you just click this button and then it does pretty much all your work for you. Under your effects controls, which should most of your windows should show up right here. This 3D camera tracker will show up, and it's going to be analyzing already. And the only thing that you definitely need to do every time is just click open this advanced tab right here and then make sure that detailed analysis is on. And then beyond that, all this other stuff is kind of icing on the cake. And it might be stuff that might be helpful if your motion tracker is having problems right here. So if you're zooming in, you're going to want to click on this, but most of the time you're not going to have that. So the default's going to be good. These 2 options just change the sizes of the X's and the crosshairs that we're making once it's already motion tracked for you. And then this tab gives you some options in case the motion tracking didn't go well right here. So you can see that, returning back to our current position here, that I now have the footage selected, but my X's are gone. In order to get your X's to show back up again, all I need to do is I need to just click on my 3D tracker right here to bring them back up. So if you ever motion tracked it and then you click away and you're like, shoot, where did they go? All you need to do is just click on the 3D tracker up here under your effects and it'll show back up again. And so to create a motion track on this, all you need to do is, hover your cursor. So I'm just hovering my cursor in different positions and I'm waiting for the circle to show up kind of where I want my character to go, but also I want it to look like it's resting on top of whatever surface this is right here. And so let me see if I can drag it into a wrong position. So this is kind of a wrong position. You can see that it looks like it's not parallel to the surface right here. And so you just want it to look like it's parallel to the surface. So this looks like a good spot. Maybe let's kind of keep looking around.
Reading the side of the black keys.
That's part of what you have to worry about right here for sure. And let's see here. Let me just find. I found some good ones. I just want to see if I can find a perfect one here. Okay. And remember, we can also change this after the fact too. So this one looks good enough for me. And so here, what I'm going to do is, so I'm going to hover my cursor over this position right here, and it's whenever it's doing this, it's triangulating 3 of those X's, and then it's creating a target point out of it. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to right click on my keyboard, and I'm going to choose the second option right here, which is create a solid object and then create a camera right here. And so what that's going to do is it's going to generate a virtual camera where After Effects is trying to figure out what your actual camera is doing, and it creates a virtual camera that replicates it. And then it also creates a 3D solid that is in this space where the target is right now. So I just held my cursor until I found a point that looked like it was resting on the surface. Then I right click right in the middle of it. And then I'm choosing the second option right here, which is create a solid and a camera. And so what that did is it created this orange. For me, it's orange. It might be a different color for you. Is it created the solid 3D object right here. So if I click over into the 2-view mode, you can see which view is this? So that is the left view. I want this to be the top view. So it generated my camera right here, and you can see it animated the camera frame by frame. So if I click on my camera and then I go down and look at the transform options under position and orientation, it frame by frame animated where it thinks the camera is in that position. And so one thing you could hypothetically do is if the track is really good, but it's not exactly right, is you could go in here and micromanage it and like delete and reposition some of these keyframes. And sometimes I've had to do that, but that can be a lot of work right there. And hopefully you just get it so that it works right away. And so right here, you can see, so the camera has animation ingrained into it now. And it created the solid object, which in the solid is created wherever that target was that I kind of clicked on the X's and then right clicked and went to create a solid object and a camera right here. And so now I have the solid object created, and it's just, there's no animation in the solid object. It's just sitting still in 3D space right there. I guess we can't see it because I had to zoom out and it's all the way out here. And so you can see that solid object isn't moving up there, but the camera is. And when I press play, it should look like the still object is resting on top of the keyboard right there. And so that's well and good, but there's one more step that we'll need to do, which is we need to get the characters on top of the into the scene right here. Okay, everyone, so gonna pick up where we left off here. So where we left off is, remember I took one shot and I motion tracked it by, so I made a, let's see here, where do I even start with this? So I made a new composition from the shot and made sure that the frame rate and all that stuff matched. One error message that I saw earlier that I had forgotten about was if you take the footage and scale it in any way, shape, or form so that it doesn't fit the bounds of the composition, the motion track won't work. So that's something to keep in mind here. And when we motion track, it creates, so remember it created we have the footage here. And if we click on it like this, so I selected the footage that I motion tracked, we did the track camera, which is the top left option. Then if we click on off of the effect, the X's go away. But if you click onto the effect, we have the X's show up. And so you're just basically taking this disc and laying it so that it looks like it's flat on the ground. And then you right click. And there's a few of these options you can do, but I really prefer to do the create solid and camera. Right now it's saying just create solid because the camera has already been created from this track right here. So that's kind of where we left off. So right now I have this footage where I have just an orange solid square that's kind of tracked into my footage right there. And so what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to take my puppet character and put it into the scene right here. And so in my compositions, I have my puppet character, which is in its own composition right here. And I've organized the character so that I can do some things like move the eye around and rotate the arms and move the arms around. So this character can move around some. And in next class, what the demo is going to be about is I'm going to talk about animating your character here. So I'm going to go over some techniques. You already kind of know how to create keyframes and all that stuff. And so you should hypothetically know everything you need to animate your characters. But I'm just going to do a quick demo, just showing you some techniques that'll help avoid issues when you're doing it here. But we have the puppet and it's in its own pre-composition right here. And you can see that it's highlighted with a little white area right there. And something you can do with pre-compositions right here is, so notice up here, and you don't have to organize it this way, but this is just the way I have it. So I called it the puppet and this is a demo, and then I called it template. And so a lot of the times I'll create when I'm working with puppets is I'll create a template version where there's no animation in it. So I have everything rigged up and it's ready to go. And then when it's time to animate, what I'll do is I'll press, so I'll select the composition right here in my project window. And then I'll press Command D or go up to Edit and then go down to Duplicate right here. And then I'll make a duplicate and then I'll call it, something like animation 1 right here. And you'll see right here that I have this duplicate of the template and now I can add animation into it. And so I can try out an animation here, but I still have my template right here that doesn't have any animation keyframes on it or nothing's really getting messed with it. So that template can just kind of be a backup, for me to resort back to for when it's time to do shot 2, for instance. I can duplicate it again and have it be, the puppet demo shot 2 rather than shot 1, just have a backup right there. But so nothing changes when you duplicate it. It just makes it so I can add keyframes to this one and it doesn't affect the original right there. So that's just, you don't have to do that, but that's just an organizational thing that I do. And so what I want to do here is, so I have a puppet demo and this is animation 1 right here. There's no animation in it right now. We'll go over how to animate it some in Thursday's class. And what I want to do is I want to bring it into my shot, which I called motion track right here. And so what I want to do here is what I like to do is I like to do a similar thing right here. So I have my solid, and what we're going to do is we're going to replace the solid with our character. And before I do that, remember that the solid isn't moving. It's After Effects has given it a position in 3D space right here, and the camera is the only thing that's moving in the scene. And then we have the footage underneath it. And what I like to do is I like to press Command D with the solid selected, or go up to Edit and Duplicate. And where is it up here? Or there we go, Edit Duplicate. So now I just have a second copy of it right here. And what I do now is I'm going to replace this solid object with my puppet composition. So you can see right here, this is my puppet demo animation 1 that I made right there. And if you're on a Mac, you hold down Option on your keyboard. So if you hold down Option on your keyboard and then I click on this and then I drag it down. And so I'm holding Option this whole time and I'm dragging it on top of that solid, and a little plus sign is going to show up right there. And it's going to replace, do you see how it replaced that duplicate of the solid right there with my puppet? And so this is the only way I know of to do it, is so you have to hold Option on your keyboard again. So I'm holding Option and I'm clicking on the composition up here. And then I'm dragging it down, a little plus sign is going to be on my cursor. And then I'm just dragging it so that it's right on top of the layer I want to replace in my scene, and a little plus will show up. And then I let go when it's above its name right there. And so you can see that I have my little puppet character right there. And it looks like the character is kind of on a card on the scene right here. So we have the character that's kind of motion tracks onto the card right now. But right now, it just, and this might be fine depending on your scene. You might want it to look like your character is on like a greeting card or something like that. But the idea I have in mind for this scene is I want my character to look like they're sitting on top of the piano. So I'm just going to hide the visibility of my original solid object right here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shift the anchor point of my puppet character right here. So in order to do that, I'm going to drag this. So normally what we do when we're changing the anchor point is we press Y, and then I move the anchor point right here. But you can see that moves the anchor point so that it's off of the keyboard right now. So I actually don't want to do that. Instead, I want to change my anchor point a second way, which I haven't really shown before. And so again, this way where you either press Y or press this button is usually the way that we change the anchor point on a solid. But this time, since this anchor point is glued on top of the keyboard right now, or onto the surface that I want to motion track this on, I want to change the anchor point down here, which instead of shifting the anchor point, or it shifts the character a little bit more. So we can see right here that I'm just, in this example right here, I'm choosing the second parameter right here, and I'm just dragging it to the right so that my character's feet kind of look like they're over top the keyboard right here. And now what I want to do is I want to rotate my character up. So because right now they're kind of laying flat on the keyboard, and I want to rotate the character up, let's see, which will be the X rotation, so that they're standing instead of laying flat on the keyboard, so this is how they came in. And I'm just going to So what I did is I shifted the anchor point so that the anchor point's a little bit underneath their feet, which again is up here in this parameter right here. So I just, oops, I clicked in the anchor point first just to shift the anchor point of my character to be a little bit more in line with the base right there. And then I went under, in this instance, it might be a different rotation for you, but for me, it's the X rotation. And I'm just going to rotate them up so that they come off of the keyboard and that they're kind of more in a 3D situation right here. And so an advantage of me keeping my anchor point near the ground right there is it makes that rotation up, you know, a lot more simple, where you might lose your track if you change your anchor point in another way. And another advantage of this is I could also scale up my character. So they're at 200%, but I could scale up my character so that they're a lot larger right here. And they'll still look like they're glued to the keyboard right now because their anchor point, it never moved, right? So now when I track the character, it has the illusion that it's kind of on the keyboard right here. So let me just, I'm going to press edit undo a bunch of times and just kind of show this process one more time. So this is kind of where we left off. I have a solid right here, and I can't just go ahead and replace this solid. It's just, I don't know why. I like to have backups of things, you know, so I'm just going to press Command D. So I have a backup of it. I'm going to hide the original, and I'm going to find the pre-composition of my puppet character over here, which I have as puppet demo animation 1. So you're going to hold Option on your keyboard, and you're just going to hold Option this whole time and click and drag it so that it goes right on top of that new solid right there. So now at this stage, it looks like the character is just kind of laying flat on top of the keyboard right there. And you can see their feet are hanging off, but the anchor point's up here. So instead of pressing Y or pressing this button, which is how we've changed the anchor point in the past, we're going to change an anchor point the other way, which is if I click on my puppet pre-composition that I brought in, and then I go down to transform, and then under anchor point, which is the first option, I'm going to drag it in such a way that the character's feet drag up to the center point of this pivot right here. So let me zoom in on this a little more so we can see what we're doing. So I think it's the middle one right here. So it's the middle number for me this time. I'm just clicking and dragging to the right, or I could type in a number right here so that now their feet is near the base of this tool. And I could rotate them up by either grabbing this red handle right here. So I can just grab that handle right there, or I can, in the layers over here under X rotation, I can just rotate them up. And so it's at 63 degrees right there. It might not be 90 degrees for you, because remember the camera, if we're looking at this from a side view, let's see here. And I'm going to switch this. This is in the top view right now. Oops. This is in the top view. I'm going to click on that, switch that to the side view right here. Oh man, I'm losing track of everything here. Let's see. I'm going to try one more. Okay, here we go. So you can see we have the camera here, and it's a little, yeah, all right, that view is not illustrating it the best. I'm going to just forget that thought. Just kind of use your eyes on this. And so chances are it's not going to be like 90 degrees that you're dragging them up, because the camera is already at a 45-degree axis right here. And so anyway, since I already changed the anchor point, now when I scale the character up, they scale from that anchor point. And so now all I have to do is go to scale, and then I can just click and drag and make the character larger, and they appear like they're scaling up from the table. Whereas if I kept the anchor point in the middle, if I scaled them up, they would look like they're floating or something like that above the scene, you know, which could be a problem. And so now when I motion track it, it should hopefully look like the character is kind of standing, at least in terms of the way the motion is working, is standing on top of the keyboard right here. And there's steps we can do beyond this, and to make it look like this character is in the scene a little bit more. Like there's some things that I like to do, like I like to duplicate this character and create a shadow off of him right here. So I'm going to show that one technique where we can just have a drop shadow off of this character right here, and then we'll break again, and we'll have the rest of the class to work. So remember, since this is a pre-composition that we have in here, I don't have any animation on this character right now, but if I were to animate this character, so I can just double click on that pre-comp, I would just do like the most basic animation ever where I'm just gonna take which is the back arm? We have the rear arm right here. I think I have a puppet tool on this. So I'm just gonna click on the pen tool, just move their arm up right here. So this is gonna be a real basic animation right here. I just want to show you that it carries over. So on this character right here, I double clicked to go into the pre-composition, and then I animated like real basic arm animation. I just want you to see that now when I go into this composition, that animation carries over, right? So whatever animation I do in this pre-composition will happen in this scene right here. And so we're going to talk about that more on Thursday's class. But for now, I just kind of want to show one more thing that I like to do in these scenes right here, which is I want to add a drop shadow for my character here. So the way that I like to do it is I take my puppet animation right here, and I press Command D to duplicate it right here. And then for the bottom option, I'm going to just press return, and then I'm going to write shadow at the end of it. And you can see that my screen is pixelating. There's a few things I can do to clear up the cache, but one thing I can do is just press play for a second. And usually, there we go, that clears it up. If you just press play for a second, it'll kind of clear up the cache. And so for this duplicate right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to solo it just by pressing this button right here. So now it's soloed. Let me just tap spacebar again. So it's soloed. So I'm soloing my duplicate, which is going to be my shadow. And what I'm essentially going to do is I'm going to make this duplicate of it black. I'm going to blur it out, and then I'm going to rotate it so that it's laying face down on the ground. So that's going to be kind of the process here. So I'm going to do that by adding effects to it. So this is going to be my shadow layer right here. So I'm going to go to layer, and I'm going to go to, effect, and then I'm going to go down to color correction. And then the first thing I like to do is go down to hue and saturation right here. So hue and saturation is a good way to kind of change the color, change the saturation on a layer right here. So with that effect, I'm just going to take the saturation and I'm going to bring it down. So now it turns into gray tone. And now when I bring down the lightness, you can see it's really easy to kind of turn no matter how colorful your layer is, you can make a black silhouette in 2 seconds just by the hue saturation effect and taking these two sliders and bringing them all the way down or most of the way down. And so next, I'm just going to add another effect to it. And this one's going to be, so under the same effects panel right here, and this is my shadow duplicate that I've been working on, is I'm going to go to effects, and then I'm going to go down to blur. And there's a bunch of blur effects we can do. And there's one called Gaussian blur right here, which is a nice effect that doesn't take too much render time, but it also looks pretty nice. So it's blur and then Gaussian blur right here. And it's a simple effect. So we just have the amount of blurriness right here, and it's in pixels. And so I can just give this, either a minor degree of blurriness or a lot. And you can see it, the disk already kind of got messed up again. So I can say I need to give this a lot of blurriness right here. So don't be afraid to kind of go with a big number here. So right now I have it all the way up to 243. And so I've had this soloed, and again, I soloed it by, you can see this dot right here. And so I press the dot next to it to solo that layer. And so right now it looks like just a radial shadow behind my character right here. And what I need to do is I need to rotate the shadow layer so that it's onto the plane right here to make it look like it's down there. So I'm going to rotate it down. And there's going to be a little bit of overlap at first. That's going to be okay around these feet. I'm going to fix that in a moment here. So you can either do it with these handles right here, or you can go down under here, under the controls, and I can rotate it with these controls right here. So I could do X rotation and bring this back down to where it was at 0. And then I could even, under the Z rotation, rotate it this way. So it's coming out of the side. And then finally, with this shadow, I can, under opacity, I can just bring the opacity and just kind of pick a value that kind of works for this project. And one other thing that I want to show that I have not shown yet is there's these different overlay modes over here. So right here is the parenting tabs right here. But we have this one. And if anyone's used Photoshop, this should seem really familiar. But these are different ways that one layer overlaps on top of the next. And so for the shadow, I'm just going to go down to the option that says multiply. And it doesn't make a big difference, but it's really helpful for shadows. just to kind of show what this tab does is, so I'm going to go back up to my main layer. And so the different kind of overlay modes. So I'm now working on my main layer right here. So this is what multiply looks like on a normal layer, right? We can do like add, and you can kind of experiment with these different overlay modes. So we have add, we have overlay. And so they just kind of, what all these modes do is it just makes it so this layer overlays on to the top that's beneath it in different ways. So for the main,
Makes it look like a ghost.
yeah, so you can make them look like a ghost, and you can kind of do some experimental things right here with these, and it's just kind of depends on kind of what you're going for here, you know. So if I wanted my character to be a ghost, maybe I go with what is this one? This is the linear dodge right here. So you can kind of experiment with these different ones, but for this, I just want my main layer to just be normal right here at 100% opacity. And for the shadow, I'm just doing multiply. You could also do color burn or darken down here. It's going to be pretty similar. And then just use your eyes to take the opacity down a little bit. And so now you can see that, so all I did was I duplicated my character. I added 2 effects to the duplicate. I added a hue saturation where I desaturated it and then took down the lightness so that it's basically a black and white silhouette version of itself. And then I added Gaussian blur, which is a really simple blur where you can just drag this up to how many pixels you want it to blur by right here. So I dragged it all the way up to the 200s, 243. And then I just took that duplicate shadow and then I rotated it back to its initial position where it's flat on the keyboard. And then I rotated it this way so that it just kind of came out because I wanted the shadow to come out to the right side a little bit. And remember, it's pixelating, so I can just press play or I can clear my disk cache. And you can see right here, so this is a really helpful tip here, is you can see how, do you see this black line that's going through my character's feet right there? So there's 2 things I can do to get rid of it here. And the first thing I want to show is I'm gonna get rid of that through a combination of 2 techniques here. And I think both of these are super useful here. So remember when we're working with shape layers, we use this pen tool and we were able to draw out the shapes with this tool right here. When you're selecting any other kind of layer, this is actually a masking tool. And so I can use this pen tool. So let me just show what this pen tool does here when you do it on a normal layer. So I'm going to solo my main layer right here. Press play for a second. And so with this pen tool, it works as a masking tool. So if I'm clicking and dragging, and I'm just going to carve out just a random spot on my character right here. So you can see, bless you. So you can see right here that with that masking tool, I'm able to kind of crop out areas of my character right here. And so I can do that same thing with my shadow. If I want to delete a mask, I just click open the tab right here, and then this new menu right here called mask was created, and I can just select mask, delete it, and it's back to normal. So with the shadow, I could use the pen tool to mask out a certain region under here, under the feet. So I could go to the pen tool and just click right here. And I'm kind of looking at my shadow right here. And I'm just drawing this out. And right now, the shadow is only going to appear in that area that I drew out, but I can invert the mask. So I'm under my shadow layer and I can go under mask. And then let's see here. Instead of add, I can go to subtract right here. And it's going to subtract that area of the mask right there. But you can still see that there's, even though I did that, there's a little bit of the mask, sorry, the shadow still showing through their feet right here. So one other thing I want to show with this mask is I can feather it. So if you look at the edge of this mask, I'm going to take the opacity of the shadow layer and bring it back to 100% so that we can see what's happening clearly. So you can see that I have my mask drawn right here, but I can, with my mask, I can add feathering to it. And so when I add feathering to it, I can make it gradual, how that mask is being created right there. So that's the mask is one way I can start to cover that up, but you can see that I didn't get rid of the feet all the way. And so I'm going to just make a couple of quick adjustments to it. I'm going to take the feather back down and change the position of this just a little bit. I'm going to take the feather back to like 10 or something. Okay. And so we're kind of almost right back to where we started. Let me just take the opacity, take this to 50. Okay, so this is a fun trick in terms of, so what I have right here is I have a 3D layer of my character, and then I have a 3D layer of my shadow, and they're overlapping each other in space right here, which is causing this weird line and gradient right there. And so something you can do to get rid of that, if that ever happens to you, is I can go up to layer, new, and then adjustment layer right here. So layer, new, and then adjustment layer. And I'm going to create an adjustment layer between these two layers. And remember, an adjustment layer is a layer where you can put it on top of everything and you put an effect on it, and then it adds the effect to anything that's underneath it. But it can also be used to divide up 3D layers so they don't interact with each other anymore. So I'm just going layer, new adjustment layer, and then I'm placing it in between my two 3D objects right here. So my adjustment layer is right there. And so now when I press play, they're not overlapping each other anymore. It kind of just magically gets rid of any interaction that's happening between two layers right there. And so now with a combination of adding that adjustment layer right there to kind of make sure that my main character doesn't interact with my shadow layer directly anymore, that helps. But I also went into my pen tool and drew a little mask just to kind of subtract any shadow that might have been coming through in this region right here where my mouse is. And so using this technique right here, you can kind of give your character a little bit of a drop shadow and start to just kind of further sell a little bit that they're in this 3D space that we've created right here. Let's see here. And so now when I press play on this, this thing's starting to kind of come together a little bit here. And you can see the animation I did in the pre-comp. So this is my puppet character right here. So I just double click, and any animation that I do in this composition right here will carry over into my scene right here. One last note right here is I only have one piece of footage that I can use right now, but what I would recommend is I can take multiple characters and put them into the same scene. So for instance, I didn't get rid of my second shape layer right here. So if I had another character, let me just kind of bring in another. I mean, I only have this one character right now, but I could bring in my other character and do the same process where I change their anchor point by going here, shifting them up, and then rotating them forward. And so you can have multiple characters in the same scene right here. So I just recommend duplicating that shape layer, a few times so that you can kind of keep replacing it with new characters. That's the reason I duplicated that shape layer at the beginning.